question. I notice that when I do the judgment calls for world situations like war and other injustices, I feel like there's a backlash, like me feeling sick or something like that. Is it dark forces, or is it because I might be too forceful in my judgment calls that I'm already taking heaven by force? I feel like the first question about thoughts of dying soon might be related here too. It might be dark forces trying to sabotage me so I would stop making judgment calls. This is a previous question I asked about a person who had a fear of dying early. We have a number of decrees and especially invocations that call for the judgment of Christ upon dark forces or upon people who are self-centered, evil, aggressive, and so forth. And it's true that when you begin to give these decrees, you can feel a certain backlash. Because the dark forces, of course, don't want to be taken from the earth. And what you're doing when you're giving these judgment calls is you're giving the Ascended Masters authority to take certain dark forces according to their vision. And this is very important to realize. You always seek to qualify your calls with the vision of Christ. And you are aware that you might not have the highest vision of the situation. And you also, what you really want to do is that what I've talked about in many videos, you want to strive to become neutral about the topic. And I'm not saying this is something you can do in 5 minutes. I'm not blaming anybody for not being neutral about these difficult world topics. I remember when I first started giving decrees back in the 1980s, I was not neutral about certain topics, because I really wanted there not to be a nuclear war that would wipe out the planet, and the Soviet Union to fall, and those kind of world communism to not take over the world, and those kind of things that were very important back then. So I can remember that I was putting too much emotion into these decrees. And that opened me to a backlash from dark forces. So what I'm saying is that, well, you can do two things. I mean, first of all, you can make, if you feel it, you can make a call in the beginning where you can give individual calls. You can make a calls for the Master to protect you from any backlash. You can also do it in the end before you give the sealing. You can make a short call for the Master to seal you. And that will work somewhat, but it won't work against your free will. So that's why I'm saying you need to look at then, if you feel like you're having a backlash, you need to look at what is my view of this situation. Can I see that there's a certain reactionary pattern that involves a lot of emotion, for example? And then if you feel the backlash is severe, you should just take a break and not do it. And then work on your way of looking at the situation. If you feel like it's manageable, then continue to do the invocations, but work on your attitude towards it. Seek to attain that neutrality, where you can just look at it and say that the earth is a schoolroom. The earth is the school of hard knocks. And it's very difficult with our conscious minds to see what exactly should happen so that a specific group of people learn their lesson. You can take as an example the Russia's war against Ukraine has now been going on for 3.5 years. Many people, Ascended Master students, have been making calls on this to get this to stop. Why hasn't it stopped? Why hasn't Putin been taken out of embodiment, for example? Well, partly, in my view, because the Russian people haven't learned the lesson that they are meant to learn from this. Perhaps the Ukrainians haven't fully learned the lesson either. Perhaps the Europeans haven't learned the lesson they're meant to learn. Perhaps the Americans haven't learned the lesson they're meant to learn. So, in other words, what I do in a situation like this, when the war first started, I could see I had a certain reaction to it because, as I've said before, I could see this would be disaster. Not just for Ukraine, but obviously for Russia as well, which we are beginning to see now, the effects of this on the economy in Russia, for example. So I had a certain reaction to it, and when I realized that, I started looking at this, and I started realizing that I had a certain desire that Russia should make the transition into a modern democratic society without any big conflicts or upheavals, that it would happen smoothly. And I realized that that was an unrealistic desire, because it obviously wasn't. I mean, otherwise the war wouldn't have started. If the Russian people hadn't simply made this unconscious deal with Putin, that if you stay out of our personal everyday lives, you can do whatever you want, then the war couldn't have started. But now it did start, and that's because there was a lesson they hadn't learned. And so I simply had to change my view and say, okay, whatever hard knocks the Russian people need in order to learn that lesson, I just need to be neutral about it. I was hoping they could learn without the hard knocks, but I could see that was an unrealistic hope, and I just simply had to step back, look at my subconscious self and let it go, let it die, and say, okay, whatever the Russian people need, however hard the knocks need to become for them to learn their lesson, I just have to be completely unattached to it. And I think that's, whatever issue it is that you might feel strongly about, it's important to get to that point where you are non-attached, because when you are non-attached, when you're neutral, you won't feel a backlash. The dark forces won't have anything. The Prince of this world comes and has nothing in you that it can pull you into reacting. So I think it's very important to come to that point where when you give these judgment calls, you're realizing you're calling forth the judgment of Christ, according to the vision that the Ascended Masters have from their ascended perspective. And you may not have that vision, and that's why you need to be neutral about what happens. You make the calls, you authorize the Masters, but whatever they do is because the issue is complicated. Every issue is really complex on Earth, and it's very difficult to have the clear vision of it when you're in embodiment. So that's why you have to be neutral. You make the calls. I'm not saying you shouldn't make the calls unless they will have a very severe reaction, as I said, because even though it may seem like there's no outcome of the calls, there is. It's just that sometimes it takes time because we have the 4 levels, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical. You start making the calls and you start having an effect on the higher levels, and it may take time for it to be physical. But it's also, as I said, the Masters are evaluating, have people learned the lessons they need to learn? And if they haven't, then they can't take certain people out of embodiment, they can't take certain dark forces, because people are upholding them through their free will. And the Masters have, for example, said that Vladimir Putin has gone beyond his natural lifespan. So he should have actually been taken out of embodiment years ago. But because the Russian people haven't shifted their view of him, they are artificially keeping him in embodiment. And the same with many other fallen beings that people are attached to and think are great leaders. It simply takes time for people's consciousness to shift, and then the equation changes, and all of a sudden that person is taken out, or the dark forces is taken out, and then the outer situation changes as well. So I think, again, strive for neutrality and just be patient, be non-attached. The calls are working. They are working even if you don't see a physical result. Then you have results on the other levels, which means that as the Masters do something at the identity, mental, emotional, there's more of a chance that people will wake up and see what they haven't seen, get the lesson they haven't gotten so far. And the calls are definitely a very important factor in that equation on Earth right now, because it shortens the time span that it takes for changes to happen and for the golden age to really start manifesting.